It's not because I live in filth, but rather because there's a ladybug infestation in the tree next to me. So there's lots of them around me at the moment. Just wanted to let everyone know that. Okay, so Lianne Habinek is a lecturer in literature at MIT, where she received her undergrad degrees in literature and brain and cognitive studies. These studies in turn inspired her first book, The Subtle Knot, Early Modern Literature and the Birth of Neuroscience, which has an awesome chapter on Cavendish. Most recently, she was a fellow at the Institute for Advanced Study at the University of Strasbourg, and prior to that was an assistant professor of literature at Bard College. She has held fellowships with the Newhouse Center for the Humanities at Wellesley College, the National Endowment for the Humanities, and various research libraries. Her current book project, Unfolding the Early Modern Page, investigates Renaissance pop-up books and other feats of paper engineering, connecting these experiments in printing to modern research in cognitive science and reading, which sounds very, very interesting.
I wanted to thank, give a big thank you to Anne and to and Sophie and Anol and E for organizing this. I had the great pleasure of attending last weekend, and it was fantastic, and really got my own mind spinning. And I'm going to come back to this idea of spinning momentarily. Excuse me. So I wanted to open with a passage from. One moment here. Yeah, sorry. Anyways, so this is a passage from probably my favorite passage in all of Cavendish. And just to set it up, it's an exchange between the Empress in the Blazing World and her bear men subjects, who are fascinated and really trying to attempting to think about and plead their case for telescopes. And of course, the Empress is incredibly skeptical of the utility of these telescopes. So I'll read the passage. The bear men, being exceedingly troubled at Her Majesty's displeasure concerning their telescopes, she's asked them to destroy the telescopes, kneeled down and in the humblest manner petitioned that they might not be broken. For, said they, we take more delight in artificial delusions than in natural truths. Besides, we should want employments for our senses and subjects for arguments. For were there nothing but truth and no falsehood, there would be no occasion to dispute. And by this means, we should want the aim and pleasure of our endeavors in confuting and contradicting one another. Neither would one man be thought wiser than another, but all would be alike, knowing and wise, or all would be fools. Wherefore we most humbly beseech your imperial majesty to spare our glasses, which are our only delight and as dear to us as our lives. So Her Majesty, on principle, really rejects the idea of telescopes and lenses more broadly. And yet the plaintiveness of the bear men has always really struck me as crucial to interpreting Cavendish's sense of natural philosophy more broadly, and specifically as it pertains to her ideas on madness, because this is a sticking point. Artificial delusions ought to be what Cavendish is actually trafficking in. She posits herself as empress of an entire world of her own making, and a fictional world in the root sense. So why would the Empress, who's the stand-in for Cavendish here, it gets more complicated, as you know, the more that you read The Blazing World, why would she denounce artifice in favor of natural truths? And I think what I want to suggest here today is that Cavendish articulates a connection between the sense of generation and madness. So madness is linked to how Cavendish perceives herself and presents herself, and as well as how she understands other people's perceptions of her. So I want to think about why she is, sort of rejecting the idea of the bear men, embracing this artificial delusion, when she herself seems to delight in artifice and in what she's calling here delusion. There's a play and a revelation and a reveling in this idea of delusion that I think is really fascinating in Cavendish's works. So Cavendish presents a kind of creative lineage, and in her own intellectual conception, ideas are formed in the brain and then they can be moved out and propagated. And it's this form of propagation that a lot of Cavendish's peers, as we all know, found disturbing, to say the least. So Pepys, calls her, at best, he calls her silly and romantic. And Dorothy Osborne, after reading Cavendish's Poems and Fancies, claims that there are many sober people in Bedlam. And the most impactful commentary, I think, was by Mary Evelyn, the wife of the diarist John Evelyn. And she comments that as Cavendish is an original, she may never have a copy. And this is anathema to Cavendish's relationship to her own works. This notion of insanity as somehow shutting off the creative process is a dangerous thing, I think, for Cavendish. Mary Evelyn, as Katie Whitaker describes in her fabulous and well-known biography, Mad Madge, says that Mary Evelyn in their meeting ran away from Cavendish because she was afraid of infection. And she didn't want her own thoughts to be tainted or corrupted by Cavendish's thoughts. Now, I think that Cavendish actually anticipated this kind of readerly recoiling, and she undercuts herself repeatedly in her prefatory writing, especially in her preface to her Observations upon Experimental Philosophy. She sees her critics and sort of anticipates them as interpreting her constant generation as worrisome and almost epidemic, just like Evelyn was doing. So she writes here, it is probable, some will say, that my much writing is a disease, but what disease they will judge it to be, I cannot tell. I do verily believe that they will take it to be a disease of the brain, but surely they cannot call it an apoplectical or lethargical disease. And none of us would claim that at all. Perhaps they will say it is an extravagant or at least a fantastical disease, but I hope they will rather call it a disease of wit. And for Cavendish, here in Observations and in The Blazing World and in many other places, disease is not a negative or pejorative idea. It is rather a pathway to creation and creative thought, especially in her fiction. So it's not that her writing is potentially at stake, it's that her much writing is what is at stake here. And she believes it will cause readers to wonder if she's ill. And so she sees that other people can interpret her as potentially being ill. But for Cavendish, this illness isn't a dangerous thing. It's something that is communicable. It's a means of, it's almost like the printing press of her mind. This is the way that her ideas will propagate. And the nature of this disease is a disease of wit. And I know that Anne was mentioning that Cavendish doesn't link imagination and madness necessarily. And I agree with that, but this idea of wit and play as being propagative is completely fascinating for Cavendish. And just to give you some examples of how she suggests the relationship between thoughts and the mind that contains them. And this is another kind of larger question, a larger concern of mine for how Cavendish articulates the connection between thoughts and the actual physical matter of the brain. So she tries on a lot of metaphorical relationships in the world's olio, and I've listed some of them here. The mind is like a commonwealth, and the thoughts are the citizens therein, or the thoughts are like the household servants who are busily employed about the mind's affairs, who is the master. The thoughts are like stars in the firmament, where some are fixed, others like wandering planets, others again are only like meteors. The head of a man is like a wilderness, where thoughts as several creatures live therein. The brain is like a forest, and the thoughts as passengers that travel therein, making inroads and beating out paths. And I think the best one, and it's breakfast time here, so I'm thinking about this, is thoughts are like pancakes, and the brain is the pan, wherein they are tossed and turned by the several objects as several hands. So these comparisons are so wide-ranging, and they shift from the domestic sphere of pancake making to the heavenly firmament, and they share some distinguishing features. So each example involves a kind of containing field, a commonwealth, a firmament, wilderness, forest, pancake pan, within which something else, citizens and stars, creatures, passengers and pancakes are constantly in potentially chaotic motion. And I want to suggest, and I hope that this will spur some conversation, I want to suggest that this sort of restlessness is one way, is one path to to linking creativity and madness in Cavendish. She is constantly producing and constantly creating, and I want to. I know that I'm running out of time here, so I want to end by thinking too about how she appropriates how other people view her potential madness, and that she takes these terms and really spins them and makes them her own, creates her own terminology. So I'm suggesting that we can think about Cavendish in her fiction and her philosophy as articulating a connection between the brain and the misfiring brain, especially as a propagative entity, and that disease and specifically mental illness are being positive, productive, and creative forces. So she frequently repurposes her peers' conceptions of her, and she pushes them into the creative realm. And here I'll finish with this mention of the dedicatory from the dedicatory epistle to her brother-in-law, Charles Cavendish, at the start of Poems and Fancy. So she says, "True it is, spinning with the fingers is more proper to our sex than studying or writing poetry, which is spinning with the brain. But I, having no skill in the art of the first, made me delight in the latter, since all brains work naturally and incessantly to some degree or other, which made me endeavor to spin a garment of memory, to lap up my name that it might grow after ages." I think we can all agree that she's been successful in this, and that the madness and the mental illness and the destabilization of these restless thoughts are actually what enabled her to produce and to produce in such an incredible manner. So I'll end there. Thank you.